the trial of Karen Reed for the death of her boyfriend, John O'Keefe, is underway.
There are 17 jurors, and they're coming and going with a police escort.
I've seen a lot of things. I've never seen anything like this. This case never ceases to amaze me.
The first week of testimony has come to an end.
It's a spectacle, that's for sure.
We really heard the defense highlight some of the discrepancies between what was documented and what first responders said they remembered.
There are a lot of issues in this case.
Proctor was improperly searching Karen Reed's cell phone for nude photos.
The fact that the investigation wasn't thorough provides a big wrinkle in the prosecution's case.
They're supposed to be creating this reasonable doubt, and they're doing exactly that.
Everybody wants to know, us included, why he wouldn't go inside that home on the night that the body was discovered.
There are more people here at the beginning of this than at the beginning of Johnny Depp's trial.
It's always the theories or stories that each side will put forth, right, for a jury to listen to and decide which one is more believable.
We asked Karen Reed about that alleged confession. Karen, did you ever say I hit him?
I did not.
The FBI is investigating an investigation of a murder. That never, ever happens.
Karen Reed was drunk and angry and hit and killed John O'Keefe when she gunned it in the snowstorm.
We're looking at arm injuries with scratches. We're not looking at tire tracks.
I did not kill John O'Keefe. I've never harmed a hair on John O'Keefe's head.
Defense attorneys learn in school, first class, the most important thing you can do is identify and select stupid juries.
We're not concerned about any of the witnesses. None of the Commonwealth's witnesses are concerning us.
Karen Reed is facing up to life in prison.
I just hope justice is served for either one, whatever it is, you know.
The fate of her life is not in her hands anymore. It's not in the hands of her attorneys. It's not in the hands of the prosecutor. It's in the hands of the jury now.
Free Karen Reed! Free Karen Reed! Free Karen Reed! Free Karen Reed! Free Karen Reed!
Well, ladies and gentlemen, we made it to the end of the trial, finally. We have a lot to cover, so I'm just going to jump right in where we left off. The last witnesses that the jury heard from were the experts. Now, this is the last chance that the Commonwealth has to explain to these jurors what they think happened. And the use of phone data, medical examiner's testimony, and crash reconstructionist are supposed to tie all of this together for them. The prosecution's theory rests solely on these experts to convince 12 people that John O'Keefe never went into the house, that he was struck by Karen Reed's car, and as a result of that, he ended up in the yard with the injuries that he sustained that caused him to lose his life. I went a little out of order on the final witnesses for this reason. Anyone can do a summary of what we heard during trial each day, but that's not what I want to do. When I started this podcast last year, I didn't want to just summarize everything. I wanted to dig deeper, look at the entire picture, and see if we can find the truth. Is there a conspiracy in Canton? Is it a cover-up? Or is Karen Reed guilty and everything else is just really bad police work and coincidence? Everything surrounding this case, the butt dials, the rehomed dog, the destroyed SIM cards, the Google searches, the argument in Aruba, none of that matters if the expert's testimony doesn't come together to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Karen Reed hit John O'Keefe with her car, causing his death. This episode is going to pull all of that together so you can decide what you think. We will look at the prosecution's theory, the evidence that supports it, and the evidence that doesn't. So let's break it all down, phase by phase. Let's start by what the Commonwealth's theory actually is. This is something that I think should have been probably presented to the jury way before the final week of trial, but Lally decided to save it for the end. Here is Massachusetts State Police Trooper Joe Paul, the crash reconstructionist for the Commonwealth, giving his expert opinion on what he says happened. I'm going to edit Lally's questions out of this next clip so that you can hear the full, uninterrupted explanation on the theory from Trooper Paul.
So, throughout my investigation, this appeared to be a single car collision involving a pedestrian. The vehicle was traveling at a higher acceleration when. The vehicle accelerated at a high rate of speed before she struck the pedestrian John O'Keefe on the roadway and subsequently left him at the scene. So this collision occurred on Saturday, January 29, 2022 at approximately 12:45 hours. A 2021 Lexus LX 570 was traveling southbound on Fairview Road, in Area 34 Fairview Road. The operator appeared to be Karen Reed, and the pedestrian was John O'Keefe. The vehicle traveled up to 24 miles per hour and approximately 62 feet. The right rear of the Lexus struck the pedestrian John O'Keefe. Mr. O'Keefe was projected forward and to the left along the front yard of 34 Fairview Road. The Lexus continued traveling in reverse before they left the area.
So, this is the prosecution's theory. This is what they say happened. Trooper Paul says that based on his training and experience, at 12:45 a.m. on January 29, 2021, Karen Reed's SUV traveled in reverse, going north in the southbound lane of Fairview Road in front of the Alberts house at 24.2 miles per hour for a total of 62 feet, striking Officer John O'Keefe with the right rear side of the car in a side swipe, busting the taillight on impact, which then caused the abrasions on John's arm, projecting him back and to the left, causing him to hit his head on either the curb or the asphalt, and coming to rest where he did in the yard about 7 or 10 feet from the street. Karen continued in reverse and then left the scene. There were no mechanical, roadway, or environmental factors that contributed, just Karen hitting John O'Keefe on purpose and leaving him to die. So did they prove it? Let's break this down, comparing the experts' testimony phase by phase, and you decide what you think. The first part of the theory is that this happened at 12:45 a.m. John got out of the car and Karen hit him before he ever had a chance to enter the house. So let's take a look at all of that data. If you've been listening to this podcast for a while, or if you followed the story, you know that the data in this case is conflicting, which has caused a lot of questions and headaches that are normally resolved by data instead of caused by data. Let's start with everything that we know that supports the Commonwealth's theory. Trooper Nicholas Guarino has worked for Massachusetts State Police for 9 years. He's in the detective unit in the Norfolk District Attorney's Office and works with cell phone forensics, computer forensics, and sexual assault investigations. Trooper Guarino tried to get access to the car infotainment center on the Lexus to download the telematics module, which is basically like a SIM card for your car. He removed the infotainment system on February 2nd of 2022, but he says that they were unable to retrieve any data from it because the hardware that pulls the data doesn't work on the kind of car she has. The other option is a chip-off, where they basically destroy the motherboard and take the memory chips off the devices and try to get data that way. Now, that's a last resort since it's destructive, and they ended up doing that in December of 2023, but no data was recovered from the infotainment or the telematics module, so there's nothing to support or contradict the theory there. What about the Ring videos that we keep hearing about? Those should be able to give insight to this aspect of the theory, right? Lally's made it clear that he believes that the Ring videos were deleted by Karen Reed, presumably through the computer upstairs at John's house. Though we have heard testimony that the information obtained from Ring through 2 separate warrants provided no evidence of Karen deleting anything. And John's niece testified that she didn't think that Karen had access to the Ring system. Guarino said that he took a Dell laptop and an HP Pavilion all-in-one desktop and took the hard drives out of both of them. These are from John's house. They were imaged, and the images were loaded into Axiom to view the data that was on them. And they were looking for a Ring video to see if either computer was used by Officer O'Keefe or Karen to log in and handle the Ring account or delete Ring videos. By looking at the images of these computers, he was able to determine that neither computer was used to access the Ring app. John's phone, he says, is the only thing that they found connected to it. Now, I want to stop and point this out because this is something that has been a point of contention throughout this entire case. We've heard from Lally that Karen Reed is the one who deleted these videos. And here's Trooper Greeno saying that John's phone is the only thing that they have found connected to the Ring app. Every piece of information and testimony that we have goes directly against Karen Reed deleting these videos. I don't think this is what Lally wanted to hear. And he tried to push a little bit on this. He asked if there were any other devices, whether they were Mr. O'Keefe's or someone else's, that he was able to get any kind of information about them accessing the Ring footage or the information provided by Ring to whether or not there were any other devices. Greeno said, not that I know of and not that I could tell or have ever heard of. That's pretty big, y'all. So the only ones that we know that had access to the Ring app were the police, who said that they were accessing it on John O'Keefe's phone. So the infotainment and Ring videos are out. So what does that leave? The cell phone data, which is conflicting. We discussed it in previous episodes in depth, but now we have the experts here to testify about their reports and their findings. Guarino was given Karen Reed and John O'Keefe's phones by Trooper Proctor, he said around 6 or 7 that night at the Norfolk District Attorney's Office. He believes that they were already in airplane mode at the time, which, of course, we know preserves the data so that it can't be wiped remotely. One question that has never been answered throughout this trial is the chain of custody of John O'Keefe's phone. We know that Carrie Roberts picked it up at 6:15 that morning, but she said that she doesn't remember who she gave it to. We know that Trooper Proctor said that he got it during his meeting at Canton Police Department, but it was recording steps and movement until just before noon, so it definitely wasn't put in airplane mode or a Faraday bag when they got it. Given the problems with the chain of custody and the deleting Ring videos, I'll always have questions about this. A lot of testimony about the cell phones was repetitive, so I won't bother going through all of that stuff again. Let's take a look at some of the stuff that we haven't seen or heard yet. Texts between John O'Keefe and Karen Reed were entered into evidence. Lally handpicked some to read, obviously only highlighting the ones that support his proposed motive of Karen being angry and jealous. The rest weren't read out loud in court, but the jury will have access to them. So do they support the prosecution's theory? We've heard about the argument that John and Karen got into that morning, and the texts start with Karen texting John about this a little bit before 10 a.m. that morning, telling him that he really hurt her this time. Here are some of the messages.
I'm sorry. This has been an issue with me for 8 years. It physically hurts me to see everyone else in their life do things for them, and I'm forced to always be the bad guy.
I'm not the same as everyone else. Most of the time, I try to do what is healthy and smart for them. More importantly, I try to support you and what you need. You just lashed out at me and said terrible things. I don't know how you've gotten to this point with me when I'm just trying my hardest. You made your point and continue to beat me down. I have a lot going on too. Physically, I am falling apart and trying to get answers and help. I am just your girlfriend. I am not a perfect parent. I am trying very hard and sometimes treat them. Nothing like I used to.
I know. I'm sorry for lashing out. I'm just hurting and struggle daily with them. I always feel like I'm failing at this parenting thing. I wasn't built for this.
Kaylee isn't perfect, but everything wonderful about her is because of you. It's true. I know she's her mother's daughter, but she wouldn't be so bright and successful if she lived with anyone else.
John sends Karen 2 screenshots, and then she responds to that.
Wow. Kristen just sent you 2 back-to-back messages to not lose your faith in the kids. Or in yourself. Life can pick you up sometimes. Please be happy with them and put away your frustrations for the rest of the day. And be so proud of yourself, JJ.
John mentions concerns about W-2s, and Karen tells him maybe he should call someone. And he asks, like who? By this time, it's about 1:45, and John texts Karen asking what time she's coming there. She said that she doesn't know what time. She kind of feels out of it and is trying to clear her head. John says okay, and Karen tells him, just text me when you guys settle in later. John says sure. About 10 minutes later, Karen texts John back, talking about their fight from that morning.
I feel pretty shitty about how this morning went down. I know you said sorry, but it really stung. Especially when I've been trying pretty hard lately. I feel like a loser turning around just coming back over after everything you said.
Not sure what else you want me to do. I said I'm sorry and I was out of line. If you prefer to stay home, I totally get it.
Things in my own life have been difficult too, you know.
I know.
Tell me if you're interested in someone else. Can't think of any other reason you've been like this.
Nope. Things haven't been great between us for a while. Ever consider that? Kids are here. Not in the mood to talk.
So you're not into it anymore. That's fine. But I don't want to keep trying and you keep treating me like this. I'm trying to hug and kiss you this morning and you whack me in the face with a pillow.
Karen goes on to say that the night before, John was like, yeah, what about, when they tried to talk about the future. She asked, why don't you just admit that you're not so much into it anymore? John says that's not how it went down, but okay. She asks him to please admit that his head is out of the game with them. He says that he's sick of always arguing and fighting, and it's been weekly for several months now. He says, yeah, he's not quick to jump back into being lovey-dovey as she is. Records show that Karen called John 18 times from 9:19 that morning when they started talking until about 3 o'clock, which is around the time that these texts are happening. The last one that we talked about was about 2:30. So 11 of those 18 calls were rejected, 4 of them were missed, and 3 were answered. The fight that they had that morning and how John is treating her is apparently really bothering her. She's trying to, work things out, and she's insistent about calling and trying to talk to him during this time. He texts her at 2:32 and tells her, OMG, stop calling. She responds then, why would you start with me this morning? She tells him that he's setting her up to fail, and he starts a number of fights from his end. John tells her that he's explained it already and he isn't doing this again. She says, so you're not into this anymore? He says he's not into fighting all the time. She tells him if he's into someone else, just let her know and he can have all the space in the world. He will never hear from her again. She tries to call him again, wanting to resolve their fight by talking instead of by text, but he tells her that he's not going to answer, to stop calling. Karen asks him, please answer, especially after how he treated her earlier, saying that he started a rager with her and then it was out of nowhere, and then tells her that he's sick of fighting. John says that his niece is right there, though, so he's not going to answer. Karen tells him she's going to go grab a drink later. He says that he's not sure why she felt the need to announce that she's going to have a drink, but tells her, have fun. She asks if he wants to meet her, and again, tries to call. They go back and forth, and Karen says, I'm there when anyone else needs me. She tells him that he gave her grief that morning, and she's been trying to get over this hump of arguing, and now he tells her that he's not into things. She tells him that he says he doesn't want to fight weekly, but he then flies off the handle with her at 8 a.m. She said, again, you're setting me up to fail. She said that she's been dealing with her own personal crisis over things that she has zero control over. She'd like to be able to lean on him too sometimes. But instead, she says she just hears everything that she does wrong. She tells him, why don't you meet me at Hillside around 4:30 or 5, or whenever he gets everyone settled. She says she wants to give him space at the house without her there, so she would rather meet him out than at the house. She asks, so do you plan on going out tonight? And he says, Karen, I don't know. You're like jonesing to drink, so go. She tells him that she doesn't feel like she needs to be at the house because after how this morning went down, she feels like he just gets frustrated with how she is with the kids. And it has nothing to do with drinking. She's just paranoid that everything she does is problematic. So she would rather see him for a minute without the kids around so that he doesn't get angry again. He asks what her plan is, and she says she doesn't have one. He asks if she's still home, and she says yes. They go back and forth, and the texts are basically John asking her if she's coming over or if she's coming there, and her saying that she doesn't really feel comfortable. She doesn't know that she wants to hang out at the house too much. He tells her there's going to be a blizzard and they're going to be inside all weekend. She says that she feels like it's clear to her that being around the kids is slowly killing their relationship. And she says that their relationship is really important to her. She said that she doesn't want to keep having this conflict with the dynamic with the 4 of them. She says that the harder she tries, the more it kills their relationship as a couple, and she feels like utter shit to be in this position. She would rather just meet him out for drinks when he figures out what his night is going to look like. He tells her that he doesn't really know yet and asks her what she wants to do. They keep going back and forth, and finally he tells her that he and Mike plan to hang out too, so just come over. She asks if they're planning on going out because she said it's been a crap day for her from the jump. He says probably, and about 5:20, this conversation is going on, and he says that he just got sober about an hour ago. She said, I'll let you hang with Mike for a few. I don't need to butt in, but text me if and when you think that you may head out. The back and forth continues for a while, and it seems like Karen keeps saying stuff about, if you just want to go out alone, that's fine, just let me know. And John keeps saying, no, just come over. It feels like after this fight they had, she's really just wanting reassurance, and he's telling her to come over. But she says that she's worried that the kids will get chatty with her when she gets there, and that is going to irritate him. He tells her again he wants her to come, says he's going out with Mike, and she says, just let me know where y'all end up. She mentions texting a plumber to look at something with her hot water since the blizzard is coming, and this apparently makes John jealous. He asks if she's trying to piss him off and says that he hopes that her plumber buddy that she texted is hot. They talk about the issue with it, and he tells her, just get over here. And he says that she won't need hot water tomorrow anyway because with the blizzard, she won't be driving. He said he figures you'll just be in Canton with me until Monday. He tells her that he and his dad could have looked at it, and she said that she doesn't want to put him out, to put either of them out, the way that everyone else in his life does. John texts her when he's heading to McCarthy's, and she responds to let her know if they end up leaving. He says, why, now you're not coming? She tells him that she's still waiting on the plumber, and he tells her that he's riding with Mike. Mike will have to leave, so she has to come because he's relying on her for a ride home. These last texts are just after 8:30 when she says that she will be up there in a few minutes, and he responds. So does this go toward the proposed motive? Crazy girlfriend who's jealous and won't leave the relationship? Not really. Based on the text that day, John got out of line during their fight that morning, and he apologized. It really upset her, and she wanted to smooth things over by talking, but he wasn't ready to talk, apparently. But he got jealous when she mentioned a plumber and told her over and over that he wanted her to come there and wanted her to stay with him for the weekend. Maybe her calling him when he wouldn't answer could show some type of crazy girlfriend vibes, but apparently not too bad since he kept telling her he wanted her to come there for the weekend. I've wondered a lot about the dynamics of their relationship because of the testimony that we've heard. We heard a lot about how Karen spoils the kids and treats them to nice things. And we heard the text between her and Higgins where she says that John wasn't ready for parenthood and she wasn't either. The text string really puts more context to all of this. The talk about John not being built for this came from John himself. And Karen was supporting him, telling him that the kids are wonderful because of what a great job he's doing. He talks about hating how everyone else gets to do nice things for the kids, and he always has to be the bad guy. And Karen says that he gets annoyed with her doing things for the kids, and that she's going through a personal crisis of her own, and she's struggling, and she says she's not a perfect parent. She's just his girlfriend, and she's trying her best. This puts a lot more context behind the text about how she's struggling with her role with the kids. So what about the cell communications and data from after? Lally introduced some angry voicemails and texts that Karen left John after she left Fairview Road that night. We'll get into those right after this break. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. I'm on social media a lot because it's part of my job. I use it for work and to keep up with friends and family and colleagues to see what's going on in my social circles and beyond. Seeing everyone's highlights can be great, but it can also start making me compare my life to theirs. I can get caught up comparing how far along I am in my career compared to my peers, or envying their travel pictures or picture-perfect family. Comparison is the thief of joy, and it's easy to envy other people's lives. It might look like they have it all together on their Instagram, but in reality, they probably don't. Therapy can help you focus on what you want instead of what others have, so you can start living your best life. It's helpful for learning positive communication skills, how to set boundaries at work or in your own personal life. It isn't just for people who've experienced major trauma or who are struggling. It empowers you to be the best version of yourself. If you're thinking about starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient and flexible and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Stop comparing and start focusing with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/juror today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/juror. It's time to look at how the rest of the cell phone evidence compares to the prosecution's theory. Spoiler alert, it completely blows Trooper Paul and Lally's time frame of John O'Keefe being struck at 12:45 a.m. Trooper Guarino says that Karen Reed's phone connected to the Wi-Fi at John O'Keefe's house at 12:36 a.m. That means that she was at John's for almost 10 minutes by the time they said that John was hit with her car. So, that part is out. Lally was wrong in openings. Expert reconstructionist Trooper Paul is wrong in his theory. Jen McCabe is wrong about what time she saw Karen's car, etc., etc. But what else can the phone information tell us about the timing? We've talked before in depth about the conflicting data of the GPS from Waze and the Apple Health data. A lot of the testimony of the experts is the same information that we've gone over in previous episodes. And surprise, surprise, they still don't agree. Cliff's Notes version, Waze data shows John O'Keefe's phone as they make their way through the neighborhood on the way to Fairview, and the manually plotted points don't show John going into the house. Now, there are a few points that include the front corner of the house and the area around the front stairs, but the data points are mostly in the road and in the yard. Guarino does admit that Fairview is at the bottom of a hill, and that can have an impact on the GPS because it's kind of a dead zone there, which will affect accuracy. But overall, location data mostly supports the prosecution's theory that John never made it inside the house. The problem is that the Apple Health data is conflicting with this. Apple Health shows John taking steps and climbing stairs at the time when the Waze data suggests that he's about a mile or so away, between 12:21 a.m. and 12:24 a.m. And Waze data says that he arrived at 12:24. So the way that the step data works is that the steps are recorded in blocks of time. So it could have happened at any point during that time frame, all together or spread out, doesn't really know. Now, David Yannetti brings up a text that Julie Nagel received from her brother Ryan saying that he was outside the house to pick her up at 12:23 a.m., which is during the time that the steps and the stairs are being recorded on John's phone. The idea here is when they arrived, John got out of the car and went up to the house, presumably entered the home, and his Apple Health recorded the data from this at the same time as Ryan Nagel texting that he's outside. Now, since we know that they pulled up right behind Karen and John, the reason that they didn't see John in the car would have been because he had exited the car before they pulled up and parked and went inside. So that's why they didn't see him go up there. Also, the final data point on John's phone is in the yard at 12:25 a.m., just 1 minute after GPS says that he arrived. It doesn't move locations again until Carrie Roberts picks it up 6 hours later. But there are steps recorded at 12:32, suggesting that this is the actual last movement. Now, here's why this is such a problem. One set of data supports the prosecution. One set of data supports the defense. Both types of data have been used to testify in trial after trial about their reliability and accuracy, and they've been used as evidence to put accused criminals behind bars. So what do we do when they don't line up? Richard Green, the digital forensics expert for the defense, tells David Yannetti that the data that was extracted from John's phone actually had 3 different timestamps, some varying by as much as 3 minutes. And he suggests that that could be the reason for the time difference. Trooper Guarino says that he's aware of the various clocks in the phones, but he doesn't think that it will affect the GPS timestamps. Guarino says that the health data could have recorded the steps while driving since there are hills in the area, But Green doesn't agree with that. He says that he used the same phone and iOS that John had and tested that theory while he was driving, and says that the phone only recorded steps consistently when he was actually taking steps. Guarino says that Apple Health data isn't accurate. It's basically just a high-tech pedometer. And Green quotes a study saying that it's up to 98% accurate. Now, I also found studies on the accuracy, and I have clips in previous episodes of experts from other trials discussing how accurate it is. So that's why this is a problem. If we have two accurate data types that don't match up with each other, what is the jury supposed to believe? But we do know that Karen and John arrived sometime between 12:21 and 12:24, give or take. The final data point was recorded at 12:25, and his final steps were at 12:32. So according to Proctor, Karen arrived back to John's at 12:34, which would only be 2 minutes later after those final steps. Now, at 12:36, which is 4 minutes after those final steps on John's phone, Karen Reed connects to the Wi-Fi at John's house. That's 4 minutes later, but it's a 6 or 7 minute drive, and that's if the road conditions are normal and it's not snowing. The times are really just all over the place, and we've ruled out the prosecution's theory that it happened at 12:45, but what time could it have happened? Call records show Karen called John more than 50 times between 12:20 a.m. and 6 a.m., leaving him 8 voicemails. She was angry and yelling at him and saying that nobody knows where he is, and telling him that she knows that he's sleeping with somebody else and using her. That first voicemail comes in at 12:37, so it would have been right after she got to John's house. The next voicemail is at 12:42, and she doesn't really speak, but you can hear her walking in her high heel boots, and we don't know if it's on the hardwood floors or if it's in the garage, but either way, we know that she's there. Now, I thought about something that Lally said. He made such a big deal about the shoes and her not taking off the shoes, so she could be inside the house, or David Inetti had suggested that she's inside the garage. We really don't know, but either way, we know that she's home. Karen texts John at 12:55 a.m. and says, "I'm going home." And then she texts him just a few seconds later and says, "See you later." He doesn't respond to either of those, of course, and she leaves him another voicemail about 4 minutes later at 12:59 a.m.
John, I'm here with your fucking kids. Nobody knows what the fuck you want, fucking pervert.
Another voicemail is left at 1:02 a.m., but it's only for 1 second, and she doesn't say anything. She basically hangs up. Right after that, there is also a text message that says, "Your kids are cucking alone," but we can assume that the K was meant to be an F. And another one at 1:04 a.m. saying, "I'm back in Mansfield. The kids are home alone." That's the last text that she sends John. And of course we know that she wasn't actually in Mansfield. It sounds like she was just trying to get him to come there. She does leave another voicemail at 1:11 a.m.
Yeah, it's 1 in the morning. I'm with your fucking niece and nephew. You fucking pervert. You're a fucking pervert.
The last voicemail before she goes to sleep is at 1:18 a.m.
John, I'm going home. I cannot babysit your niece. I need to go home. You are fucking using me right now. You're fucking another girl. He's sleeping next to me. You're a fucking loser. Fuck yourself.
We know that Karen wakes up sometime between 4 and 4:30 a.m. panicking, and she leaves this voicemail for John at 5:23. Now, before I tell you what I think she may be saying, listen to it so that you can hear what you think. So let's argue both sides here. If you're looking at this from the prosecution side, this was left at 5:23 a.m., which is just minutes after Karen's SUV is seen on camera on Washington Street going toward Jen McCabe's and or 34 Fairview. So Lally believes that Karen went by Fairview Road first before she went to Jen McCabe's, which is why he says that it took her a few more minutes to get to Jen's than the estimated drive time, and why he says that she was able to see John O'Keefe in the yard before Carrie or Jen did. So listen again. Could she have just gone by Fairview Road and seen John in the yard and leaving a voicemail saying, "John, is that you?" Now let's argue the other side. Her phone never pinged on the towers that she used while she was at Fairview the night before, and the same towers that she used later that morning. So that would suggest that she did not go by Fairview. She could have been calling and saying, "John, where are you?" Listen to it again. So, what does this tell us for the first part of our theory? The 1245 part is definitely out. The part about John getting out of the car and Karen hitting him before he ever had time to enter the house, that's kind of going to depend on which set of data the jury believes or which set they put more weight into. They kind of cancel each other out if you believe both of them, but you can't really believe both of them if they're contradicting each other. So that's just going to have to be up to each specific juror to figure out what they believe. The only part of that we were able to confirm or rule out is the 1245 part. Before we move away completely from the cell phone data, I want to bring up one more thing. Look, people are really emotional about this case. I get it. And I try to discuss the evidence as objectively as I can while still using my own reason and common sense to come to conclusions as I see fit. I mean, I'm not a robot after all. I'm going to have opinions on things. And this next point is one of those things. And for this, I am not going to filter my opinions. On day 28, the Commonwealth wanted to introduce a Google search made by Karen Reed on her phone at 1:27 p.m. This was minutes after she talked to Proctor, who wanted to come interview her, and she Googled DUI attorneys. Now, is this surprising? No, not really. We already know that she was asking people if she hit him. She was driving drunk. She seemed confused about what happened, and she knew that she had damage to her taillight. Now, the state police are calling and want to come interview her, so she Googles a DUI attorney. Not a big shocker. But here's the thing. The Commonwealth wants to introduce this as evidence that Karen Reed had intent and opportunity to commit an intentional crime. Y'all, that is slimy. It's disgusting. It's unconstitutional, and it goes against every fundamental right in this country. The right to remain silent, the right to hire an attorney, the right to a fair trial, everything. Prosecutors are not allowed to use these rights against a defendant. They're suggesting that only guilty people hire attorneys. But how many of the Alberts have we heard from that hired attorneys? And McCabe's and Higgins? Besides that, attorneys are not just for guilty people. Nobody should talk to police without hiring an attorney. Using this as evidence of proof of guilt sends the message that you should only get an attorney if you're guilty. Otherwise, you should just talk to police. No big deal. But then they'll use everything you say against you. Could you imagine having these conversations with Proctor? Long conversations with Proctor, who we know we can't trust, without an attorney? They are literally asking the judge to be able to present evidence to the jury saying that Karen Reed is guilty because she hired an attorney. This is unconstitutional. And the case law they provided is about someone searching for a handgun, not someone searching for an attorney. How can you even compare those two? The judge didn't even let Yannetti finish his argument about why it shouldn't be admitted. And he was mad too. She didn't allow it in. She said that it would be more prejudicial than probative, so it was excluded, as it should be. But the fact that this prosecution even attempted it is shameful. Next on our list of experts is the medical examiners. So let's start with the prosecution side. We heard first from Dr. Renee Stonebridge, the Director of Cardiac and Neuropathology at the Chief Medical Examiner's Office in Boston. Dr. Stonebridge works as a consultant for the medical examiner. She basically issues a report to the medical examiner, and then they use that in terms of determining their cause and manner of death if necessary. She is board certified in anatomic pathology, clinical pathology, and forensic pathology, and neuropathology. There's a lot of technical and medical terms that Dr. Stonebridge uses in her testimony. And look, she does a great job breaking it down for the jury. In this episode, I'm not going to get so into the weeds with all of that. I really just want to focus on kind of the main points. So here's what we need to know from her testimony. John O'Keefe's brain showed multiple hemorrhages and contusions, including a subarachnoid hemorrhage, which she explained is likely caused from some type of trauma. There were contusions, which are basically just bruises, in the brain, and ruptured blood vessels, which usually indicates the brain has been pushed against something. The acute traumatic injuries resulted from something that required some type of force, given that there were skull fractures. Now, she can't say what type of force or how much force, but it was definitely something that causes some type of force, which led to those skull fractures and to the subsequent brain findings. So this could be consistent with a fall or being struck by a vehicle and falling to the ground. So there was trauma to both the front and back of the head, and this is consistent with both theories. So let's move on to Dr. Irini Scorti-Bello. She is employed by the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. I've gone over her credentials before in a previous episode, and she's impressive. You'll also remember that Proctor called her a whack job because she would not rule John O'Keefe's death as a homicide. But I digress. And actually, if we're comparing Proctor on the stand to Dr. Scorti-Bello on the stand, the doctor definitely isn't the one who came across as the whack job. Again, I won't spend too much time going back over things that I've been over in previous episodes about her report, but I want to focus on what she said as it relates to either of the theories. So we know the cause of death was blunt impact injuries of the head and hypothermia. And nobody disagrees on that part, just on how it happened. So Dr. Scorti-Bello says that she could not determine the manner of death as a homicide because she did not have enough information to determine if the injuries were accidental or not. I think that says a lot to a jury if the medical examiner can't tell by the injuries and the evidence that's provided to her what kind of death this was. But we'll see. So let's look at the blunt impact injuries of the head. Now, Dr. Scorti-Bello says that the blunt object could be anything without a sharp edge. The prosecutors ask if it could be the ground, and she says yes. So that would be a check for both sides, really. The defense attorney, Eliza Little, asks if it could be a dumbbell, and Dr. Scorti-Bello says yes. So that would be a check for the defense theory. Now, there was not a lot of damage to his actual body, which is something that has always kind of been confusing for me. But she did say that there were fractures to his ribs, the fourth and fifth rib, but these fractures would have been from CPR. There are also small hemorrhage spots in his stomach, but those are associated with hypothermia. So both of those issues can be ruled out as far as trying to determine if it would come from a car or a fight. So, are these injuries consistent with being hit or sideswiped by a car? Dr. Scorti-Bello said that usually when a pedestrian is struck by a vehicle, she sees injuries to the legs from the bumper. But, of course, John O'Keefe didn't have any of those. He actually had no significant injuries from the neck down. And when she was asked if this was consistent with being struck by a car, she said it was likely and unlikely at the same time. That about sums up everything we've heard in this case so far, right? She said that she can't really say if the injuries to the arm are inconsistent with being hit by a car going 24 miles per hour because she's not a reconstruction expert or a biomechanics expert. But don't worry, we'll get to those soon. So, could this be a fight? Dr. Scorti-Bello says that she didn't see any major signs of significant altercation. Now, there is bruising on John's right hand, but she says that there's also a pinpoint mark centrally located on his hand, which to her suggests an attempt to get an IV. This can cause bruising, so she says there's no breaks or fractures on his hands and no bruising on his knuckles. So if this were a fight, John wasn't the one throwing punches. Now, defense attorney Eliza Little walked through each injury with the doctor, asking if it could be consistent with the different parts of their theory. And Lally did kind of the same for each part of his theory. Kind of. Let's go through it. So first, the injuries to the face. A small laceration on the right eyelid associated with bleeding, and black and swollen eyes. Lally asked if the laceration could be consistent with glass. I don't know where the glass is suddenly coming from to the face. That's new, but he asked, and Dr. Scortibello said it could under certain circumstances, but her answer sounded more like a question. She didn't really seem too confident on that one at all. Kind of like it could, but it's not very likely. Now, as far as the black eyes, that can be caused from fractures to the base of the skull. Eliza Little asks, could this be consistent with being punched? And Dr. Scortibello says yes. So that one can go toward either theory. Next, the scratch on his head. The defense asks, could this be consistent with being dragged? And Dr. Scortibello says yes. And she says it's not typical to see only one laceration if someone is being dragged, but it is possible. Now, the laceration on his head. Could this be consistent with hitting his head on frozen ground or asphalt? And could it have come from a dumbbell or something like that? Yes and yes. So both theories, okay on that one. The hand wounds I mentioned a minute ago. It could be bruising from the IV. It could also be consistent with defensive wounds. The arm scratches are not consistent with road rash or a rear tail light, according to the doctor. And based on what's provided, Dr. Scortibello said that she doesn't know what caused them, but she did agree that they could be consistent with German Shepherd claws. So that one, more defense, less prosecution. Now, when she was asked her opinion on how John O'Keefe sustained those injuries, she said she does not know how they came to be. She described them and said they're consistent with a fall and hitting the back of his head, and they could be consistent with being punched and then falling back and hitting his head. So again, it could really go either way. Next, let's look at the defense's medical experts, who are equally as impressive in their resumes. First, we have Dr. Frank Sheridan. He is a retired pathologist and chief medical examiner at San Bernardino County Coroner's Office. He performed around 13,000 autopsies. That's crazy, right? And he's been certified as an expert more than 400 times. Now, to prepare for this, he did not do the autopsy himself, of course, but he reviewed the autopsy, the neuropathology report, the toxicology report, autopsy pictures, the complaint outlining the basic details of the case, the pictures at the scene of death, the pictures of the car, pictures of John O'Keefe before the autopsy while he was still at Good Samaritan, videos at the death scene, death certificate, document from CERT, and police reports from Canton Police Department. So he went through everything. The other medical examiner that the defense brought in has a ton of experience too. I'm not going to go through everything with Dr. Marie Russell, but y'all, I work a lot and her work history makes me feel lazy. She has 16 years of formal education beyond high school, which includes college and then 4 years of medical school, then 4 years of emergency medicine, residency, and internship. And then 4 years of pathology residency, which includes 2 years anatomic and 2 years of forensic pathology. She took pre-med courses at MIT, and then she decided that on top of being a doctor, she also had interest in law enforcement. So she went to Boston Police Academy and became a cop in Massachusetts. She was sworn officer for 7 years while continuing her education to become a doctor. She took classes through the Massachusetts Criminal Justice Training Council, attended Northeastern University, where she got a bachelor's in psychology. Then she went to University of Massachusetts Medical School, or UMass, and that's where she got her medical degree. She did her residency at Los Angeles University of Southern California, or LAUSC. The reason I bring this up is this is one of the busiest trauma centers in the U.S., and then she did another residency in anatomic pathology, then forensic pathology at the LA County Coroner's Office, where she also did a fellowship. So while she was doing the forensic pathology and anatomic pathology residencies during the daytime, she worked as a full-time ER doc supervisor in the capacity of an assistant professor for Cal State in the evenings. But that's not it. She taught master's level courses on legal medicine and forensic medicine. She spent almost 30 years as an ER physician, and 4 of those were in training, but the rest, she was a supervisor. She later became a director of the USC Center for Life Support Training, teaching doctors and surgeons life support courses and advanced trauma life support. Then became director for the Emergency Medicine Department Quality Improvement Program, which basically looks over different cases and finds errors. So this program looks at what went wrong in other cases and then works to have systemic improvements, teaching improvements, and teaches the doctors that were involved how to prevent errors from happening in the future. Then she became director for the LAUSC Jail Medical Services, which served inmates from the LA Sheriff's Department, LAPD, California Highway Patrol, and any of the other municipalities. So it was pretty huge, and she was the director of that entire hospital system. She also worked as a consultant for the California Medical Board while working as a physician, then became chief medical executive for the state of California at the state prison before retiring last year. She's a fellow, which is a higher status than just a member of the National Association of Medical Examiners, and she's a fellow of American Academy of Forensic Science. She has also, and this part's important, she has published peer-reviewed articles and done research in the area of animal bites and scratches. She is the author or co-author of a peer-reviewed article named Managing Law Enforcement Dog Bites in the ER, and co-author of an article called Law Enforcement Canine Dog Bites, Injuries, Complications, and Trends. She says that it's hard to estimate how many patients she's seen in her career with animal injuries, including bites and scratches, but she said it's well over 500, possibly around 1,000, and she's been qualified as an expert in medicine, forensic pathology, and wounds in both federal and state courts. This woman is impressive. I thought I worked a lot of hours, but she makes me look like a slacker. Now, the reason I want to go through how impressive her resume is because we almost didn't get to hear from her. Lally wanted Dr. Marie Russell to be excluded from being able to testify. Under Rule 14, every criminal defendant in Massachusetts must produce to the prosecution their expert witness opinions so that prosecution can prepare. Kind of like how Lally was also supposed to turn in his discovery to the defense, and they kept waiting on Bodie Labs, among other things. So the day prior to trial starting, or at least the trial starting, meaning they were working on impaneling a jury, April 15th of this year. The defendant then provided notice of all the experts. Now, again, Lally is making it out to be like the defense intentionally waited for all of this, but the defense actually doesn't have to turn this in until the Commonwealth has turned over all of their discovery, and they hadn't done that, so it makes sense why they were waiting. Now, the Commonwealth filed a renewed motion for reciprocal discovery, and the defendant was ordered within a week to produce the expert testimony that the Commonwealth is entitled to. All of this pertains to Dr. Marie Russell and the 2 crash reconstructionists that were hired because of the federal investigation by the Department of Justice. We'll get to more of them in a minute, but right now let's just focus on Dr. Russell. Lally says that he didn't know anything about Dr. Russell being an intended expert until about week 6 of the trial, around May 21st. And he says it wasn't until May 30th that the defendant provided a brief synopsis of what the expected testimony of Dr. Russell would be. So Lally wants this excluded, but here's the crazy part. In their filing, as part of trying to get this excluded, Lally flat out lied. He misrepresented completely what David Yannetti said in a pretrial hearing about canine DNA versus canine arm injuries. He says that when Yannetti talked about there being no more issues with the canine DNA, he misrepresented that in this filing and said that he was basically saying to the court that he wasn't pursuing the canine arm injuries. And that's not true. Obviously, we've been hearing about it this whole time. Here's David Yannetti responding to the judge.
The Commonwealth, in a public filing, wrote the following on page 3 of its motion. Quote, during a pretrial hearing on February 15th, when asked by the court whether there was any dispute about a canine's involvement or canine DNA, Attorney Yannetti indicated no, and that the defense was not pursuing such claim. I was astounded to read that for 2 reasons. First of all, it is false. It is a lie. Second, the Commonwealth has knowingly lied about something where it's easily verifiable that they lied. We pulled the tape from February 15th.
I don't have that.
I'm sorry?
I don't have that in my motion.
It's on page 3, Your Honor.
I don't see your name at all, Mr. Yannetti. I'm on page 3.
Sorry, it's not page 3. It's page 4. My apologies. My name is right there on page 4. It says exactly what I just argued to the court.
Okay.
All right? We pulled the tape from that February 15th hearing. Here is what was actually said. This court asked me the following. Quote, while we're talking about DNA, Mr. Yannetti, do we need to be concerned about canine DNA? Where do we stand with that? I replied, no, I think this is the only outstanding DNA issue. The court then replied, okay, so all right, we're not dealing with canine DNA. And I said no. There is nothing in there, contrary to what the Commonwealth has represented to this court in a public filing, that I said there was no canine involvement. There is nothing in there, contrary to what the canine represented to this court and to the public, that the defense was not pursuing such a claim. Can you imagine the nerve of the Commonwealth to spend that interaction?
This is the hyperbole I don't need. Could you please get to the point? We've got a jury coming in 15 minutes.
I understand, but this is my integrity has been attacked. There have been allegations of bad faith that has been attacked, and I need to defend myself and my client. We were only discussing at that time whether canine DNA was still outstanding, and I succinctly replied no. And they've spun that, or tried to spin that, into a claim that we're somehow waiving our right to argue that John O'Keefe's arm injuries were consistent with a dog attack. And I ask you, have they no shame?
I know the judge didn't want to hear it, but I don't blame Yannetti for being upset. As a layperson, I feel like if Lally can put something in a public filing that's false about misrepresenting something I said, then I should be able to put on the record my response to it, even if the judge doesn't necessarily want to hear it. So in the end, Dr. Russell's testimony about the dog bites is allowed in. So let's take a look at these 2 defense medical experts and see what they have to say about John O'Keefe's injuries. First, do they think that the injuries sustained are consistent with Trooper Paul's theory? Dr. Sheridan says there are too many inconsistencies. He talks about the absence of injuries, the bruising on the arm, if that's the point of impact, or any point of impact would have bruising. He said, but there's no bruising on the torso or anywhere else where the car would have struck him. He said most cases that he's seen had injuries on the legs, including fractures. Now, this is pretty much the same thing that Dr. Scorti-Bello said. Lally asks him during cross-examination if the car sideswiped John O'Keefe from the rear of the vehicle, would he still expect to see bruising and other injuries? And Dr. Sheridan says, yeah, you would still see significant bruising in one of those areas. Fractures and internal injuries may vary, but you would definitely see bruising for sure. Lally said that he had bruising on his hand. Thought we went over that part, but guess not. Anyway, Lally asks if Sheridan has ever seen a sideswipe rear impact collision. Dr. Sheridan says that he can't really remember such a case that's specific. And Lally asks him if the information that he didn't have makes a difference. He says the taillight pieces that were found in clothing and DNA on the taillight housing and hair that was confirmed by mitochondrial testing, etc. I think he's kind of suggesting that he was given limited information to get his opinion, but also DNA and a hair being found on a car doesn't really change a medical professional's input on the injuries. But regardless, this man has done somewhere around 3,000 autopsies involving motor vehicle collisions and hundreds of pedestrians struck by a car. And based on his experience, he says there are just too many inconsistencies. If John O'Keefe were hit by a car, there would be at least significant bruising, maybe fractures and broken bones, but at least significant bruising. And there's none. Dr. Marie Russell is only allowed to give her expert opinion about the marks on John O'Keefe's arm. So let's do that part next. Dr. Russell looks at the photo of the injuries to John O'Keefe's arm. Now, she's very clear about her opinion, based on a reasonable degree of medical certainty, that these injuries were caused from an animal attack, possibly a large dog. She describes the pattern of the injuries. There are a number of patterns that she says could be teeth or claw marks. Around the elbow, Dr. Russell says those are bite marks. She says that you can tell that they're from teeth because in addition to the parallel marks on the top and bottom, there are also little incomplete puncture marks, little round marks that were inflicted by the actual point of the tooth. Also at the elbow, there's another series, a different series of marks that again have linear abrasions up where the point is and then down below. Some superficial, round, small abrasions or punctures again representing up and lower teeth. Dr. Sheridan says that he has done animal attack autopsies, quite a few, at least a dozen or so, and he says that John O'Keefe's injuries are consistent with an animal attack. He said that he can't say that he's 100% sure, but he believes that these are most likely a dog using claws and possibly teeth. So, same thing pretty much that Dr. Russell is saying. Now, he actually points to the same elbow marks that Dr. Russell did and said the same thing, that those are teeth marks. So both of these medical examiners gave independently the same exact opinion on the elbow marks, which I find really interesting, especially since the medical examiner for the prosecution was unable to say what she thought that the marks on the arm were from. As far as the rest of the arm, aside from just the elbow, there are also some irregular wounds down just below the elbow that Dr. Russell says are on the exterior surface, or what doctors would call the posterior surface of the arm. She says this is the part of the arm that you would hold up and would sustain the defensive type wounds. So if someone were to protect themselves, this would be where those claw marks from a dog would be. Now, as she's explaining this, there is an objection that's sustained, but it was something that the jury was able to hear. So what about the arm as it relates to Trooper Paul's theory? Dr. Sheridan says that the injuries are not consistent with an arm being hit in any way by a car. Not the way that the Commonwealth described, because again, there's no bruising, and pattern injuries are not consistent with being hit by a car. So what did Dr. Sheridan have to say about the rest of the injuries? Let's talk about the head. He says that the injury is slightly to the right of the midline, and there's a laceration, which means the skin is opened up or split, so there's bleeding. He said there's also extensive bruising, and the fracture starts at that point traveling forward, so that shows where the impact was. And he also discusses the brain having significant injuries. These are all things that we've heard from the other medical experts as well. So is this injury consistent with striking the ground, like dirt or grass? Dr. Sheridan says no. It would have to have been a hard surface. He said snow doesn't make a difference. That might even cushion it more. But even without that, grass is just too soft. It wouldn't be able to cause that severe of damage. Now, he was asked about asphalt causing that head injury. And Dr. Sheridan said, yes, if that's what happened, then the asphalt could definitely cause that injury. But based on the information that we've seen, he said he doesn't think that's what happened. There's nothing in any of the reports, and there's nothing in Trooper Paul's information that suggests that he actually flew back and hit his head on the asphalt. He's saying that he was thrown off to the left, which would have been in the yard. So even though Dr. Sheridan is agreeing, yes, asphalt could do this, that's not really in Trooper Paul's report. He discussed the black eyes as well. Now, he says the same thing that the others do, that this could be from head injury or it could be from impact with the front with the eye laceration. He said basically there's no way to tell what it's from or if it's from both or how much is from either. There's really not a way to tell. He is also asked by Lally, is it possible that the laceration on the front of John O'Keefe's face came from the tail light or the glass? And Dr. Sheridan said, in my opinion, no. Now, remember, this is the one that he also asked Dr. Scorti-Bello, and Dr. Scorti-Bello was kind of like, I mean, I guess it could under certain circumstances. So it seems like, again, he's asking, and again, the opinion is pretty much, that would be really hard. Dr. Sheridan says, in his opinion, no. Lally says, is it possible that the lacerations are caused by blunt force that shattered and hit his face? Dr. Sheridan said, it is not even conceivable. So according to these two medical experts, the prosecution's theory is pretty much out. But what about the defense's theory? Could this be consistent with a fight or an altercation? So Dr. Sheridan said that he's done about 1,000 or over 1,000 autopsies that were homicides, and maybe a couple hundred of them were involving blunt force trauma. He says these injuries could be consistent with a physical altercation. Now, the head injury, he says, has a laceration over the right eyelid and scrape marks on the face and bruises on the back of the right hand. And he says all of those could be consistent with an altercation. He also says that ice on the ground would not change his opinion on the head injury. Now, there are no injuries to the left arm, left leg, torso, back left side, none of that. When Lally is doing his cross-examination, he asks Dr. Sheridan, is there any autopsy or any kind of case that you can remember where an animal attack is only on one side? And he says, yeah, there are some. So needless to say, these two medical examiners did not really go too well for the prosecution. On cross-examination, there was also a couple of weird moments where Lally was cross-examining Dr. Marie Russell. Now, one of the things that was talked about was how she got involved in this case. She saw an article about this in the Boston Globe. When she was doing her voir dire, she mentioned having seen this article, and she ended up getting in touch with the defense team through an intermediary because she had so much experience in this, and this is something that she could potentially help with and offer her services for. So during voir dire, she said that she had a subscription to the Boston Globe for about 6 months or maybe a year. Now, Lally asks her again on cross-examination about the Boston Globe subscription, and she says again that she thinks she had like a 6-month subscription. And there's this weird moment where he tries to have like a gotcha moment, and he talks about the subscription being for 18 months, and that a few days ago she said it was for 18 months. Now, that's not what I remembered, so I pulled the footage, and she never said anything about 18 months. She said the exact same thing both times. But here's why I think this is interesting. There's been so many situations lately where I feel like the prosecution has done some really shady stuff, and I've mentioned a couple of them today. I've mentioned a couple of them almost every week for the last few weeks, honestly. But this is what I'm wondering. The jury does not have access to go back and listen to the testimony from the voir dire. That was all done outside of their presence. So it almost makes me wonder, and this is pure speculation based on my experience with the prosecution at this point, but it almost makes me wonder if he was questioning her about this and kind of giving the impression that she was lying so that it could potentially hurt some of her credibility, because based on her resume and her opinions, she seems to have a lot of credibility with the jury. And what she had to say is not something that he wants them to believe. But once again, he's misrepresenting something in open court that can easily be verified. The problem is, it can't be verified by the jury in time for deliberations. There was one other issue that he brought up, and he talks about the National Academy of Science report on odontology. Now, the doctor says that she's unfamiliar with this, and Lally says that basically the article says that this bite mark science is not reliable science. And he kind of talks to her about it, and she says, yeah, she agrees that certain aspects have been deemed unreliable. But the thing is, the science that he's talking about is comparing two different bite marks and trying to say if they come from the same animal. It's not looking at bite marks and determining if they came from an animal or what kind of animal they came from. It's two totally different things. So again, it's kind of irrelevant. So what have we learned so far? The cell data is conflicting. One supports one side and one supports the other. The prosecution can't be correct about what time they say that Karen Reed allegedly hit John O'Keefe. We know that. All of the medical examiners that looked at the head injuries were all in agreement that there was blunt force impact, though if John O'Keefe were thrown off and to the left into the yard, the The grass would apparently not have been hard enough to cause that damage. None of the medical experts agree that the arm injuries are from a taillight, and 2 of them were very specific about them being from animal attacks, even pointing out the same specific points on the elbow as bite marks and all of the others as claw marks. An altercation is not ruled out, but it's unlikely that John O'Keefe was fighting back if there was an altercation. Lally's explanation of the lacerations on John's face were pretty much shot down by the medical examiners. So, once again, we are left with injuries not seeming to match up to what the prosecution says happened. Now, this is where the crash reconstructionists come in. Since I was on vacation last week for the holiday, I won't make you wait for the next episode. It will be released tomorrow, and it will break down step by step the theory of Trooper Paul and the test results of Dr. Wolf and Dr. Rentschler from ARCA, who were hired independently by the Department of Justice to investigate this for the federal probe into this case. I'm telling you, you do not want to miss this one. It'll be out tomorrow. My name is Brandi Churchwell, creator of 13th Juror Podcast. If you're enjoying it, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and share this episode with your friends. For more information, photos, and episode guides, visit our website at 13thjurorpodcast.com.